The biggest risks right now are China, Russia, and Iran. Those are the major countries that are disrupting the world through their activities, clearly with Russia in what they're doing in Eastern Europe, China with North Korea and their support, Iran through the entire Middle East and the Gulf.
I'm surprised that North Korea, though I know it's embodied to some degree in your China answer, is not on that list.
You're exactly right. I look at this point in time, given North Korea's activities and what they continue to do with nuclear technology, especially with their continuing miniaturization program, when you look at trying to mate it up to their ballistic missile program, which is maturing in coordination with the Iranians, China's the one that aids and abets them completely, both through economic, industrial, and financial support. And they're the ones that we need to start looking at in order to get the North Koreans under control.
Commander, what are we doing right? And I hate to focus on what we're doing wrong, but what we're doing wrong may be more important.
I think the things we're doing right is that we're starting to reprioritize, for example, in foreign aid. When you look across the globe, we're beginning to say, okay, it's not necessarily a withdrawal of foreign aid, but it's a reprioritization. Are the American people getting the most bang for their buck? When you've got a $20 trillion debt, we have to reassess where we're spending money and that it, in fact, is furthering U.S. national security interests across the globe. While many allies are concerned about this, I think the U.S. is still continuing to remain engaged around the world, which is good for us and for them.
But when you let's just go back and think about this for a second. When you think about the risks to the system and specifically to us. Is the foreign aid, is the diplomatic issue, is that the problem? I mean, there's been a big discussion about what should happen to the State Department.
I think it's a perception issue. When you look at what the Department of State is doing, for many years we have had the ability as a nation, with the bounty of our country and the largesse that we had in our budget, to be able to give foreign aid out, not necessarily with no strings attached, but clearly with not some of the controls and accountability that we need to have in place these days. We want to make sure that we remain engaged, that we use that foreign aid for education programs for military officers, for weapon systems that the United States isn't using but we can still sell to other countries, for development of other countries and how they exercise their military, their coast guards to safeguard their exclusive economic zones off of their coast to make sure that their resources aren't being pillaged by other nations like China throughout Africa. And we want to make sure that we continue to do that. And State Department is that tip of the spear where they're out there. They are the primary department because you want to engage nations first and foremost diplomatically.
What do you make, though, of what appears, if you read some of these stories, to be almost a mini insurrection among many of the diplomats across the world?
I think it's more perception than it is reality. They look at how the Trump administration came in, what was said on the campaign trail versus what the reality of it is, that Secretary of State Tillerson, Secretary Mattis and the Department of Defense are doing, along with McMaster's with the Security Council. I think that we have a very robust policy that's in place, but you've got a lot of people, quite frankly, that are working to undermine it right now because they aren't really willing to take the time to peel it back and say, okay, we understand what's being said on Twitter and other places versus the reality of what's being executed with many of these nations in engaging with them and in working to further U.S. interests across the globe.